nerds, and welcome on into the nerdiest podcast that you're going to hear today. I'm your host. My name is Luke. I'm an assistant director of instructional design, an author, blogger, podcaster, and overall learning nerd. And my purpose is to be able to help you learn more about teaching, learning, and design. And if I can help you on your instructional design journey, well, that just makes it all the better. And of course, you can find all the resources that I have for you over at drlukehobson.com. And by the way, folks, if you have been following this show and the newsletter and the blog and everything else, you have seen and heard a couple of different types of signs that I mentioned about how my wife and I are having our first baby. And this is going to be happening very soon. The due date is next week. I don't know what to expect as far as for where that's going to take my projects like the YouTube channel, the podcast, and all the other different things I do. Really, I'm just going to spend as much time as I can to support my wife and obviously the newborn baby. So I'm assuming I'm going to have no sleep and that my life is going to look very different. So if you do see that episodes are not coming out on a normal basis, or you're like, where the heck is Luke and what happened to him? Well, most likely I am running on 2 hours of sleep and attempting to help out the little one and my family. So just an update for that in case if I just randomly disappear, all is well and everything is good. And today's episode, folks, is the newest edition of Confessions of a Learning Nerd, the newsletter that I created over on LinkedIn. It is much more research-based, way more different types of articles and scholarly sources and references galore. So there's a lot more that goes into this compared to my normal style of blog and podcast. But this topic is something that I've been thinking about for a while. So it definitely does cross over between the two, which is talking about what did we talk about before generative AI? Now, here's the thing. Every single year, without fail, educators are introduced to a new trend that is promised to revolutionize education. That's always the pitch, and we keep on hearing this time and time again with the promise of the latest, shiniest technology or learning strategy or tool or technique that will truly make a difference. Most of them don't really pan out, though, even though they can be useful in particular circumstances. But that's not exactly marketing friendly. Can be quite helpful with enough training, dedication, resources, and budgets. Doesn't exactly scream you need to pay attention to this idea. And then there's generative AI. Has it transformed or revolutionized education? No, not yet. But the one undeniable thing it has done is disrupt education. It's impossible to read an educational newsletter, email, journal, or anything else that isn't plastered with AI topics. Are you planning to attend a learning and development conference soon? Well, I hope you like AI, because that is all that you are going to hear about. Also, this is a good time to mention that today's episode is brought to you by A1 Steak Sauce. A1 kind of looks like AI, but anyway, even scrolling through LinkedIn, every single post I read has some AI affiliation. It might be a generated image, a conversation about tools, a new approach to assessments, a policy update, or research on generative AI's impact on learning. This constant stream of AI content has fueled the rise of AI influencers. At the same time, it has prompted others to dream of escaping to Green Bank, West Virginia, the town that banned Wi-Fi, cell phones, and microwaves. You can Google that. This is a real thing. While I'm always in favor of being informed about the latest technology, this did have me thinking about the quote-unquote before times. What were we talking about before Gen AI? Pre-2021, what were we sharing about instructional design and teaching and learning? So let's go all the way back to just a few years ago and remember the good old days. The first thing that came to my mind was Zoom fatigue and camera requirements. You're on mute. Yes, the pandemic times, back when I lost all sense of time and understanding. And in the newsletter, I captured an old Facebook post of mine from November 18, 2020. And this is what it says. It says, anyone else check the calendar every hour to remember what day and month it is? You can tell me it's October, November, or December, And I'd believe you. I also just told someone to have a great weekend on a Tuesday and then realized it's Wednesday. Ah, yes, the good old days right there. Do you remember what your life became, though, with Zoom? In 2019, I had a hybrid schedule, 2 days at home, 3 days in the office, or flipped, depending upon the project. At first, I found the transition to working full time from home easy, but after a few weeks of the same routine, it became mentally draining. The odd part about working remotely was that work life balance didn't exist. I would start working at 5 a.m., and half my team was already online. Or I could send an email at 9 p.m., and I get a reply back almost immediately. Of course, part of what contributed to this was the way we were all trying to escape reality by connecting with friends and family on Zoom. You spend 9 hours on Zoom for work, and then you hop on more calls for a birthday party or a fantasy football draft. Nothing quite prepared us for being on camera 12 hours a day, with one of the strangest parts, which I still haven't figured this yet out, is the etiquette around eating on camera. Still don't know how to do that accordingly. So how does this relate to teaching and instructional design? For one, it raised questions about synchronous sessions, specifically whether students should be required to keep their cameras on. Should it be mandatory or not? For many empathetic educators, it quickly became clear that requiring cameras wasn't feasible for a number of reasons. There's been a growing advocacy for further research around this issue, and this quote from Inside Higher Ed captures it well. And it says, "Yet a cursory search of the literature shows research relating to communication, technology, and the use of cameras as data gathering tools, but none of the necessity of cameras for learning or engagement." And, in fact, the added anxiety for some students who ask to turn their cameras on may actually diminish their participation as they feel a need to monitor their home, their family members, and their intimate spaces while attempting to attend classroom interactions. While some folks have said, "Glad that's over, let's go back to in-person courses," the pandemic left a lasting impression on both remote work and online learning, and more on this later on. One element I genuinely enjoyed while teaching during the pandemic was the flexibility to host live sessions with my asynchronous courses. I still do this with my students in the EDD program for Applied Learning Sciences at the University of Miami and for my students in Instructional Design Institute. And I found that even one session a week became a focal point of a course, especially from the students' feedback, and it seems like I wasn't alone in this. And I recently came across an article from Harvard Business Publishing that focused on the importance of human connection in asynchronous courses. The author, Trish Berg, Associate Professor of Management at Heidelberg University in Tiffin, Ohio, mentioned, "I believe universities should follow suit and prioritize adding synchronous moments into asynchronous learning. After all, as college educators, we are preparing our students for their future careers, and many of them will work remotely. Teaching them how to stay connected in a remote world is a key part of their learning process and career preparation." In my opinion, that little bit of human connectivity does go quite a long way. The next topic was a fiercely debated one: learning experience design versus instructional design. What are we? What should we be called? Are we learning experience designers or instructional designers? Is there actually a difference? Does it matter at the end of the day? I assume most folks think of this as a newer topic, but there was already a strong push to rebrand instructional design back in 2015. Connie Malamed, founder of the e-learning coach, wrote a thought-provoking piece called "Instructional Design Needs a New Name." In the article, Malamed explains how instructional design has evolved with a growing emphasis on user needs, learning sciences, and the overall experience. She argued that focusing solely on instruction is outdated and that it's time to reinvent the field. Niels Floor, author of This is Learning Experience Design and the person who claims to have coined the term LXD back in 2007, offered a different take. He expanded on his perspective in an article titled Learning Experience Design is not a new name for instructional design. These pieces sparked plenty of conversation, spilling over into LinkedIn and Reddit, and it wasn't long before practitioners in higher education picked up on this trend. Soon, universities like LSU and Northeastern University began offering certificates in learning experience design. So, what's the verdict? Are they different? Well, from interviewing actual learning experience designers, here are a few key points that they shared about for the differences. One is talking about the primary focus from instructional design, achieving specific learning objectives. Learning experience design, it's a holistic creation of engaging learning-centered experiences that considered emotions and motivations. The methodologies are different. Instructional design follows something like with ADDIE or SAM, or for backward design, where learning experience design focuses much more on UX principles and considering empathy and thinking about it from an iterative type of a process. The approach to the design is different, content-centric, emphasizing the efficient delivery of information versus learner-centric. Thinking about the tools is going to be different, and even the evaluation methods are different. Now, I promise you, some instructional designers have just heard what I just said and have looked into these conversations and discussions before and thought, but I already do all these things. So what does that mean? I don't see the difference. And that's exactly the issue. There are overlaps and gray areas. Some instructional designers do everything a learning experience designer does, while others are stuck in order taker roles. An LXD would never dream of skipping research and jumping straight into building a quick training of an authoring tool. That kind of task could fall under an instructional designer's role, but there are plenty of IDs who would never rush their design process and who would push back firmly on that kind of request. While researching this topic, I found that people are still actively talking about it, and I'm sure the conversation will continue until the next big thing comes along. In my opinion, it all comes down to your employer and what they expect from you when it comes to designing learning experiences. They can call you whatever they want. And sometimes those titles are at least consistent, which helps to create a bit of stability and standardization. For example, government roles in the United States are often titled Instructional Systems Specialist, ISS, and you can find many of these positions at usajobs.gov. And right now, they're hiring quite a bit, by the way. If you're looking for a role, I would head on over into that site. Some organizations have gone with a hybrid title, like learning designer. I don't think that we're ever going to land on a clean, conclusive stance because our field doesn't have an industry-recognized certification or a license. We don't have anything equivalent to a CPA, a PMP, or a CSM. There are organizations that are certainly respected, such as Quality Matters and the Association for Talent Development, but they haven't created enough momentum to standardize a title or define a common set of responsibilities for an entire industry. All of this becomes even murkier when we think about the differences of sectors within higher education, corporate, nonprofit, K-12, and all the other ones too. At the end of the day, as long as I can design meaningful, relevant, and interesting learning experiences, you can call me whatever you want. If you want to dive deeper into this conversation, I'd recommend watching Dr. Ray Pastor's video that breaks down LXD versus ID. He did a fantastic job with this one, and he goes over many of the points that I just mentioned about, but does them much better than I just did. If you're thinking about the future of titles, you can also read one of my newer articles that was talking about what will our job titles be in the future. And of course, for that article, I hope you have your tinfoil hat on because that one is certainly interesting. And once again, you can find all of these links for today's episode in the show notes and by going over to read that newsletter. The next topic that came to mind was misconceptions of online learning. The pandemic brought a spotlight to the world of online learning, and maybe not for the better. With the immediate shutdown of face-to-face classes, every course had to become a quote-unquote online course. In reality, this was an emergency situation, and the courses created were built out of necessity for survival. There was no plan in place. It was common to hear that universities were trying to flip their courses online, and the rush to put everything together in this way often led to learning experiences that felt bleak and disappointing. Faculty weren't to blame, though, in my opinion. There wasn't time, there wasn't enough resources or budget or support. For many, this was their first time teaching in this modality, and they were properly trained or equipped to manage online learning. What broke the hearts of instructional designers and educational technologists around the world was hearing how all online learning was being lumped together. There are incredible online courses and programs that exist, built on decades of research and best practices. And overnight, it felt like all of that was dismissed. This isn't a new issue. We have been pushing back for years against the misconception that online learning is inherently inferior to in-person learning. One article that addressed these challenges was called "The Difference Between Emergency Remote Teaching and Online Learning." The authors, Charles Hodges, Stephanie Moore, Barb Locke, Tori Trust, and Aaron Bond, did an excellent job of shifting the conversation around online learning and introduced a key new term: emergency remote learning. According to the authors, researchers in educational technology, specifically in the subdiscipline of online and distance learning, have carefully defined terms over the years to distinguish between the highly variable design solutions that have been developed and implemented: distance learning, distributed learning, blended learning, online learning, mobile learning, and others. Yet an understanding of the important differences has mostly not diffused beyond the insular world of educational technology and instructional design researchers and professionals. Here, we want to offer an important discussion around the terminology and formally propose a specific term for the type of instruction being delivered in these pressing circumstances: emergency remote teaching. This article spread quickly and inspired other educators to contribute their own content. One of my most popular blog posts, "How to Convert a Face-to-Face Class to Online Remote Learning," came from that same time period. While it was truly a chaotic moment, it brought a new sense of community to those of us working in EdTech and online learning. There were certainly some benefits of this exposure to the general public, though. For one, instructional designers became the emergency contact for universities. A group of researchers, and I'm linking their paper once again into this podcast episode, they dubbed us as first responders, and I found that quite fitting. I spoke with thousands of representatives of higher education institutions during this time frame, mainly because they had never heard of instructional design before and were shocked that this was even a field. Yes, indeed, magical unicorns do exist who can transform your learning experiences, and you should hire them. It's a beautiful thing to hear about how universities hired their first instructional designers, and they're still there today, and they're thriving. The second benefit is finally getting through to the average person about the importance of catering to learning preferences and students' diverse needs. For some students, online learning is simply better. It's flexible, more affordable, more accessible. It works. But it wasn't just students. Some faculty members emerged as strong advocates for online learning. The script flipped, and you began to hear preferences for blended and online offerings. Despite the many ups and downs that came with the pandemic and online learning experiences, permanent and positive changes have taken hold. And the last topic that came to mind when writing this article was learning analytics. What does educational data mining, business intelligence in education, and learning management system logs have in common? Well, they are the roots of learning analytics. Phil Long and George Siemens were the pioneers of learning analytics back in 2011. This was marked by the first International Conference on Learning Analytics and Knowledge, and they described the need for this field because of three reasons. The first, the growth of data surpasses the ability of organizations to make sense of it. This concern is particularly pronounced in relation to knowledge, teaching, and learning. The second, learning institutions and corporations make little use of the data learners throw off in the process of accessing learning materials, interacting with educators and peers, and creating new content. And the third, in the age where educational institutions are under growing pressure to reduce costs and increase efficiency, analytics promises to be an important lens through which to view and plan for a change at course and institutions levels. And I found the website that went to this conference in 2011, and you can read all of this and more, which I always find so fun to go back to almost 14 years ago to be able to find this information about this conference. It was really cool to be able to see. And of course, from those 3 different bullet points, they were spot on. And this field has evolved with each passing year. Concepts such as predictive analytics and learning analytics literacy began to emerge. And wow, doesn't that sound familiar with all of us talking about AI literacy? Anyway, from here, and where we left off with before the Gen AI boom, was talking about 2 key types of areas around learning analytics. The first area is data security and privacy. In 2017, an article from EDUCAUSE titled 7 Things You Should Know About How Learning Data Impacts Privacy highlighted the dangers and the pitfalls of data. The article stated, given the multiplicity of sources and uses of learning data, and in the light of the evolving interests of service providers, managing the privacy of learning data requires user education and awareness, as well as policies and enforcement aligned with the emerging impacts of learning data on privacy. While some educators emphasize these concerns around security and the unknown, institutions were struggling to figure out how to use learning analytics in a meaningful way. And over time, more use cases and research began to emerge. The second area is with an exploration of the positives of learning analytics. And 2 scholars, whom I'm about to try to pronounce their names right now, and I am so sorry if I absolutely get these wrong. Adedeo Taofiq Quadri and Noor Biha Shakur published an article in 2021 in the International Journal of Emerging Technologies called The Benefits of Learning Analytics to Higher Education Institutions, a Scoping Review. In this review, the researchers found that benefits of learning analytics were numerous, such as improves the student performance by identifying learning outcomes in areas needing support during the learning process, reveals learning behaviors and endurance, helping educators understand how students interact with digital tools like e-learning and mobile learning, supports adaptive learning by helping instructors tailor content based on learner needs, enables early interventions through tools like course signals, which combine LMS data, demographics, and prior performance to deliver real-time, personalized feedback, predicts student outcomes such as grades, graduation rates, and dropouts using statistical models, informs curriculum development by identifying course dependencies and content gaps, helping institutions redesign courses and programs for better learning analytics, and so on and so forth. Numerous benefits of using learning analytics when appropriately and done correctly. And stories of using learning analytics for student success became a focal point, such as with Open University and Georgia State. And it's so fascinating to see one topic emerge over the years to the point where you can go to school for a master's degree in learning analytics now. And if you don't know where to begin, EDUCAUSE and EdTech books have a wealth of information for you. And as much as I would love to keep on reminiscing with you, I do need to wrap this up somewhere. So here are a few quick honorable mentions. The metaverse, RIP, extended reality, microlearning, gamification, social learning, and mobile learning. My main takeaway from writing this article, folks, and from creating this podcast episode for you was that this was a bit unsettling. I had to genuinely reflect on what we were discussing only about 3 years ago or so. Since then, I have thrown myself into the deep end of learning about AI, trying to figure out as much as possible, experimenting and sharing the results with folks like yourself. And in doing so, I set aside other topics that I was passionate about, and revisiting them has rekindled some of these old feelings. So it's a good reminder to not lose sight of what truly matters, especially for us when it comes to designing learning experiences. So, what do you think? What were you talking about before the Gen AI boom? Go to LinkedIn right now. You can see the post that I have about this article, and let me know in the comments, what were you passionate about before 2022, 2021? And hey, if you like today's episode, make sure you're subscribing to this podcast episode and subscribe to that newsletter, Confessions of a Learning Nerd. As always, reviews for this show are extremely helpful to be able to spread that learning nerd message And the more that you do, of course, the more and more grateful I am for seeing those reviews come in. So thank you so much for being kind and for reviewing this show. Of course, if you liked it, be a friend, tell a friend, and to share the episode. And for any follow-ups or questions or comments or anything that you do have for me, you can always email me as well, luke@drlukehobson.com. And of course, you can always find me on LinkedIn. And once again, my life is about to look very different within the next 7 days or so, maybe, depending upon when the baby comes. So you might see me disappear, might be coming and going. I might be very delayed in emailing you or writing back to you for things of that nature. And once I finally kind of figure things all out again with my new type of schedule, certainly you are going to be seeing me more again. As always, folks, thank you so much for your support. It is so much fun to do these types of episodes and writing these articles for you and interacting with you and for growing our Learning Nerd community. And that, my friends, that is all that I have for you today. Stay nerdy out there, and I'll talk to you next time.